Welcome to the Nano podcast. I'm your host, Will Chernlin, and I'm excited to have you join me on this journey through the world of nano companies. For the past decade, I've talked to thousands of business owners across various industries. It's been an enlightening experience revealing the vast tapestries of entrepreneurship and innovation that thrives beneath the surface of mainstream media coverage. Each week, I will interview different leaders of nano-cap publicly traded companies to learn about their history, what they do now, and their future. As a reminder, none of this information is financial advice, and it is all for entertainment purposes only. Let's start this week's episode. Hi, everyone. This week, we have Scott Maskin, the CEO of SUNation Energy, stock ticker SUNE. SUNation is a resource for our communities to take control of energy and use through clean and reliable solutions. Scott, thanks for coming on the show.
I appreciate you, Will. Thanks for having me today.
So Scott, you have a kind of an interesting start to your career. Tell me a little bit more about how you even just got involved in the music industry, being a roadie, traveling around, any cool stories you got from that. But were you just always excited about music and just kind of hung out backstage too much? Or how'd you get involved with that?
I'm one of those guys that I put my sail up, I let the wind blow me into a direction. And when I've done everything that I want to do, I kind of fold up and find another opportunity. It was, probably 1980. I'm not even sure you were born in 1980, were you? Okay. 1980, I found myself unloading trucks for a local club that had rock bands. That was 79. I just graduated high school, didn't know what I wanted to do. And, 6 months later, I signed on with a lighting company based in Long Island City, New York, and found myself on the road with Aerosmith on my 18th birthday in 1980. And I spent from 1980 to 1988 touring with mostly heavy metal bands, starting as a lighting grunt, ending, I was one of the electricians on Live Aid. I finished my career in 1988 on the Motley Crue Girls, Girls, Girls tour. I will not share any of the hijinks, but I spent about 8 years on the road out there with pretty much every band that was out there. And it was a formidable time to be out there, in the music industry.
And then I just curious, you said about 1987, 88, you stopped. How did you acclimate back to the real world?
Well, I fell in love, and I decided that I was looking around me. I had a tour break. I was heading out on some pretty major world tours and wound up in a bar on Fire Island, New York, and fell in love that day. And I was like, you know what? I kind of did everything in the music industry I was trying to do. So wound up, her brother was a licensed electrical contractor, and I, hung up my roadie days and became a grunt trenching in street lighting and just went from there, and then became a licensed master electrician and went into business myself in the traditional sense of being an electrician. So, and I think it's 37 years later, I'm still married to the same woman.
Congrats.
Yeah.
So you're working as a master electrician, and then, whatever, pun intended, a lightning bolt hits you.
Yeah.
And in 2001, you decide, I think solar is the future. Solar, real quick, but solar in my short lifetime has gone from it's going to save the world to it actually creates more pollutants than it doesn't. It's too expensive. Now it's going to save the world again because it's the best, most efficient, cheapest way. And so kind of tell me where in the cycle was solar in 2001? What got you so excited with having an electrical background? What kind of struck you?
I love that you did this because we call it the solar coaster. Literally, when I take you through 2001 through 2026 and explain the dips, the valleys, the peaks, the highs, the lows, it's been a ride. But, I had a pretty successful electrical contracting business, but in businesses, trades like that, who can do the most, fastest, cheapest, right? And it was about 2000, my cousin came into my backyard. He's like, you should really look into this solar thing. Our utility at the time was a company called LIPA. They were really trying to embark on renewable energy. They had a fabulous thing called the Solar Pioneer Program, and they were paying $6 a watt for a rebate for a solar system. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I took like a 1 month class. I already had all the electrical background. And this was like the infancy of the industry, right? So they didn't even have like parts, right? It was a tree hugging out east kind of industry in New York. It was starting to take off in other places like Hawaii, which we'll circle back to Hawaii, but it was the beginning of the solar industry in the United States. I said, sure, let me give it a shot, right? I could always build a better mousetrap. So I designed a system from my home in Oakdale, New York. I put it together with my wife and a buddy of mine in a weekend, right? I laid out $28,000 in materials, which was like, whoa, for a 7 kilowatt system. Put it together. Again, there were no parts. There were solar panels, there was inverters, but no real way to make a watertight connection to a house. We didn't even need building permits, right?
Really?
And put it up. And I was like, all right, this was cool. And that system was actually the 14th system in New York at the time, right? So talk about early adoption. And I got when it was done, I turned it on and the meter started spinning backwards. Now, remind you, I laid out $1,000 to do this thing, but the meter's spinning backwards. I got a check back from my utility in 3 weeks for $42,000. I had a state tax credit of $5,000 and a 30% federal tax credit. And at that time, the sale price on a 10 kilowatt system was $90,000. So I got a $30,000 federal tax credit, $5,000 state, and $42,000 back for a $28,000 outlay in equipment and a weekend's worth of work. And I'm like, so why doesn't everybody do this? Right?
So was that more the genesis then of SUNation Energy? The idea that between taxes, between utility companies, this and that not only can your power be free, but you can be getting a paycheck? Or was it more the idea that like, hey, if it's this good now, we're already seeing next year's solar panels are that much more efficient, that much more cheaper. We got to get on this early because this is going to be a must moving forward. Kind of like, what was the winds behind you that got you so excited?
Dude, making $42,000 for a $28,000 outlay in a weekend was good enough for me. That was enough to say, hey, I'm going to keep doing my electrical contracting business. But, my partner, was like, hey, let me go sell. And I said, just go sell a system. And sure enough, he sold one out in Montauk, New York. And we put it together through my, and it just started to come. The genesis was the electrical business is the cheapest, fastest, and this was like an opportunity to sort of build an industry. Listen, I'm about making money. I love saving the planet. But the philosophy was we have an opportunity to build an industry, a local industry, and make money at it, right? In retirement. And, I was a kid. I was just starting out with, you talk 2000, it was, I was young. I was full of it. Let's go and build something, and just stuck with it. I can tell you that as we embark on this discussion, there's been some super highs and some super lows, in the industry. We're in a really weird transitional time right now, but that's what it started was. This was a way to make money, and the utility adopted it. They were putting money behind it. Electric rates on Long Island were, at that time, everybody hated the utility also. That was the other thing. Like, they were doing a shitty job at the kitchen table. The grid was not reliable. And I was like, okay, so the green side, aside, this is a way to make money and build a business was the first thing. Ultimately, when I look back at it, 23-year career, we've been in business for 23 years. When you look cumulatively of what this company, SUNation, has done, and, we'll get into the Pubco also side of it, but this one New York, mom and pop brick and mortar type company today has now installed over 10,000 systems, residentially, commercially, municipally. We've installed over 140 megawatts of solar on this island and in the Con Ed territory. And we offset this year $42 million of what, my neighbor doesn't spend to the utility. He pays his fair share into the, the grid. But that $3,000 that he saves every year Well, that goes to judo lessons or a local pizzeria or something. So we've offset $42 million, and it grows every year, of reliable energy, grid reliability, grid diversification. So everything that's good, all the boxes, are checked. So 23 years of working at it, and watching a lot of come and go in the industry. And again, we're the public company that had an idea of the roll-up strategy was what we truly wanted to do. But I don't want to get ahead of you because I know you're trying to develop, how did we get to where we are?
Yeah, no, yeah, I am going to take a mini step back. So because of the kind of market structures that you described, where it's this win-win-win-win thing, it also attracts creative business models along with it. Like you were saying, you figured out you could just make a bunch of money selling power back to the utility companies. I'm down here in Austin, Texas, and I got some kid knocking on my door every other day trying to get me to install solar panels for free for them then to sell my energy back to me at some reduced rate. And it's this kind of like, I'm pretty versed in business. I've been running my own business for over a decade. I have a podcast about finances, and still it's not exactly clear to me exactly how I get paid, how they get paid. When did that become part of the solar kind of industry, that this like door-to-door salesman convoluted way of you get a free roof, but then you got to pay it back to them, but then actually they're paying you, and that type of thing? When did that get introduced? Because you talk about your business partners kind of going door to door, but obviously it wasn't fleshed out like that at the time.
No, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So of the 10,000 plus systems that we've originated, installed, and serviced, 38 of them are owned by third parties. The rest are owned by the homeowners.
Wow,
so
nice.
The idea was never, in the beginning and still today, the idea was never to sell, to monetize that energy that the utility pays you back. The goal was to get to a zero so that you're using the utility power when you're not producing. We'll talk about storage also, but when solar alone is not producing, you're on utility, meter spinning forwards. And during the day, when you're not utilizing the energy, it's spinning backwards. So the goal is to get to a zero at the end of the year. And that's where you've now saved that $3,000 or $2,000 a year that, in your pocket. There are people that own cars. There are people that lease cars, right? It's a different mentality, but we've always been bullish on the ownership of solar, that after in the early days, people would take out an equity line of credit at, 0.5%, because it is an equity investment in your home. So they were using the equity in the home to pay for it. It's morphed in circumstances where people, like, instead of gifting to their grandchildren or kids, people are paying for energy and putting a solar system. It's gone through all kinds of different waves. But, ultimately, the business model of delivering on promises, them seeing the benefits of ownership of the system, creates not just the servicing of the system after, as components start to wear down, but it also creates a lot of referrals. Cost of lead acquisition is sometimes the most important the costliest side of the solar sale on the residential side, right? Now, I'll fast forward you to your question. It was about 2010. Believe it or not, the door knocking model is a residual of the Latter-day Saint movement in Utah. Okay. So when
Classic.
You think of LDS, you think of Jehovah's, and you think of door knocking. Hey, let me tell you about Jesus, right? So, and to this day, so when you think about where that all started, you think about companies like Vivint, okay, which was an LDS Utah-based company, Sunrun. All of these companies were formed, that door-to-door model came out of Utah and the LDS movement, all right? For better or for worse, that's where it all stemmed from. In New York, we don't like people knocking on our door. I'll just say it like that. You better be selling Girl Scout cookies if you're knocking on my door. But it is a very functional method. Traditionally, when you talk about density, when you talk about door-to-door knocking in your area, I don't know how far apart the houses are. Okay,
I'm 25 feet from my neighbor.
Okay, so that works for door-to-door knocking, right? They can do a ton of stuff throw a lot of crap against the wall, see what sticks, right? So the third party ownership model is very different. It is in favor now because of the changes with the tax credits with losing 25D. So that's kind of how this got into favor. High density areas, traditionally in New York, you talk about low, moderate income off takers. You talk about Queens. You're talking about, city where things are more compressed. You don't knock on doors in Southampton, New York. It doesn't work yet. We do a lot of work in the Hamptons because it's a building code requirement. So you'll notice that environment where there's a lot of density is where is where door-to-door knocking can be the most functional. It's not something we've done well at.
Okay, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. So you're working on SUNation there for about a decade, and then you start hearing more and more about like the average person's buying a Tesla and an EV. And then people are starting to crypto mine out of their own houses. And less your pitch is, hey, do you want to just have cheaper air conditioning in the summer? And it's more that these people have these like electrical intense hobbies is one way to maybe describe it. And then as recently in the last few years, AI. For the longest time, it was not only was like maybe solar not a sexy industry to be in, but just energy in general was not. And now you hear like the White House talk about like energy dominance and energy supremacy and such. Like, again, how did you did you start just thinking, okay, we're going to do Tesla charger installs. We can help with those too. I guess we're going to do some batteries too because people want to have a battery in their house. And then all of a sudden you go, okay, we're not just a solar panel company. We're a whole energy company. Tell me more about that transition a few years ago.
Yeah, energy as a service is very interesting. First of all, you have to go back, and look at how diversified energy is in the United States. Today, if you were living in my business in Oahu, if you were living in Hawaii, you'd be paying 46 cents a kilowatt hour for residential power. You do not do a solar system in Hawaii without a battery to monetize that stored power. In New York, where I right now is probably about 30 cents a kilowatt hour. But again, in Austin, okay, in place in Texas, different drivers create different opportunities. So you may be 16 cents in Austin, but diversification after a hailstorm, okay, after what you guys in Texas went through with the grid failing, right? That drives opportunity. It drives people to take control of their energy and not just be, if you think about energy in the home, it's sort of the only thing that is really not a choice. I've used this for, everything the headphones that you're wearing, you had a choice. You could go on Amazon and say, here's 5 different headphones. I choose this one. But at your house, you go home and you turn on a light switch and it comes from your utility. And that was it, right? And they had you held captive to buying power from them. This is where solar and storage kind of made sense, whether it was ownership or third-party ownership. It made sense to control that energy thing. What we've seen in the solar coaster is when there's opportunity, when there's growth, okay, you're 100% right. The vipers come out, okay? There's always people that come in with very holistic values that want to do the right thing. And then there's the other people that are like, listen, I can bang this person. I can get $8 a watt to install a system, fly off in my jet after my business. And you've seen a lot of them go down. The problem with the solar industry is how fragmented it is. So, you've always had the big dominant people. Solar is today still $1 per kilowatt hour. It's the cheapest to install, most cost effective. I hate the word cheap. It's the most cost effective way to generate power on a commercial rooftop or residential rooftop compared to, and everything gets subsidy. I'm sorry, oil gets subsidies, gas gets subsidies, nuclear, everything gets subsidies in something through tax credits or whatever. But we've seen this like, okay, here's a glut of equipment that was coming from China and, let's inject tariffs. There's always something that puts a barrier to full scale adoption of it. Back to the energy dominance, so it's really important that the United States creates and isn't vulnerable to power, right? Like, to buying power, buying oil from elsewhere when we have all these resources here. So I'm bullish on, energy being produced, equipment being produced in the United States. But, your answer, the question, the fragmentation of and what drove SUNation and my decisions 4 years ago, this started in 2014. There was a company called NRG, massive Texas-based energy company that was under the guidance of a guy named David Crane, was saying, hey, listen, oil's cool, renewables is cool too, and let's sort of transition, and started getting involved in the solar space, right? He was just NRG was a little too ahead of the curve, especially being a Texas-based, red state kind of thing, try and transition to what is perceived as green, blue politically. He built, a place in Vegas called Ivanpah, which was a concentrated solar thing that is still there. But so we started looking at the growth of SUNation being this small nano company on Long Island, New York, that was doing great work, and say, okay, what's next, right? So the idea was we wanted to be part of something bigger. And so Solar City came knocking at the door. We were not ready, under Elon Musk's two cousins with Solar City, then NRG. And we started to see this opportunity to scale our business and be part of something bigger, which is what drove it. It wasn't the right time and the right place. David and I are still very friendly. Mr. Crane and I still speak, but it wasn't the right time. We just kept seeing opportunities come, and we realized that the roll-up strategy of strong regional players, back to the regional side of what you're talking about. Power in Texas is different than power in New York. Nobody is crypto mining out of their house on Long Island at 36 cents kilowatt hour, or in Hawaii at 46 cents, a kilowatt hour. It's just, you can't make money mining. By the way, just so you know, the same people that were thinking about crypto mining, you forgot one thing: EVs and grow houses. People started when the marijuana industry was going wild. They were starting to grow weed in their houses, and then all of a sudden, I'm sizing solar system. How is it possible this 3,000-foot home has a 30,000 kilowatt hour grind? Right? It's well, he was growing weed, in his basement. But we started to think about how cool it would be to execute on this roll-up strategy of bringing lots of SUNations together under one roof, right? And so that we can compete against the Vivints, the Sunruns, all these people. And that's what drove 4 years ago us going public with a company called Pineapple Energy out of Minnesota.
Yeah, so okay, Pineapple Energy is out of Minnesota, but it's Hawaii based, correct?
Well, so Pineapple Energy was the brainchild of a guy and two people in Minnesota to raise the capital to formulate this roll-up strategy. Their first acquisition was a company in Hawaii called Hawaii Energy Connection, which if you're gonna roll up companies, go into the most lucrative market where power's the most evolved market where power is the highest cost. So they purchased a company called Hawaii Energy Connection, which was and is still a good company. Okay. Step two was, I think they raised at the time around $32 million. And all of this is in my 10K. I'm not showing you any MNPI, right? So just so you know, this whole electrician roadie CEO transition to CEO of a public company is mind blowing. But learned a lot in the last 4 years, right? So a lot of capital was raised, but it was really kind of super toxic capital, which we learned. So roll up was number 2 was SUNation in New York. Again, high quality company, high kilowatt hour rates, and we were ready to be part of something bigger. And that's where kind of the story, the next phase of the story ends. And the capital stack became oppressive in a market that was being really challenged politically, right? There's for every blue, there's red, for every, hey, we need energy, but not that energy. It's always been a hotbed of problems, whether it's trying to get solar panels out of China or not getting them out of China, or a boat getting sideways in the Suez Canal. There's always some challenge in this industry, the latest being the one big, beautiful bill.
No, I always hear it's just day in the life of being a business owner is just waking up, just taking your knife out immediately because something's going to get you. So how much of your day is spent on trying to grow the commercial side of things and helping out big data centers and warehouses with the big solar panel things? How much of it is you just trying to get as many EV chargers installed in people's houses as possible? Because like down here in Texas, like the city will basically pay for the EV charger to be installed through credits. And then from there, you can sell them a battery pack and a roof too, because it's an easy kind of in and they trust you there. And then how much of it is your energy split between just looking for more companies to roll up?
So we always have maintained, when I took over the company 2 years ago, I think last week it was formally 2 years ago that myself and my partner, Jim Brennan, took over what was Pineapple Energy became SUNation Energy. And myself and Jim have spent the last 2 years detoxifying the cap stack, cleaning up the shell, and really erasing what a naive CEO created. So that the last 2 years, 100% of my time was out of the businesses into the pubco, because for the businesses, for us to execute on the roll-up strategy, all of the stuff had to be erased so that we could move forward. So I'm proud to say the work that we have done, end of year really proved it. But this is what I would call a very opportunistic industry. Okay, it goes where the wind blows us. So, if we had this interview a year ago, it would be, hey, we're cleaning up the stack, and we've had 114 different conversations with companies like SUNation that want to roll up. Okay, EBITDA is diversification of a company for us is very important. We don't look for the traditional residential solar company. What we're looking for is somebody that has residential under the hood, commercial under the hood, service under the hood, roofing under the hood, everything, because what will happen is residential goes down, commercial comes up, service goes up, then commercial is very lumpy, residential comes up. So when I say you have to be so nimble and be able to move around. All this creates opportunity, but ultimately, we had to pause on the roll-up strategy because you need capital, and your stock really has to be valuable in a nano cap stock, competing against the solar cities and the sun runs and stuff like that. So access to capital drives. Can you do that? In the meantime, well, let's talk about the current state. What did they throw at us? Last July they threw up the one big beautiful bill. So now everything changed. Every bit of energy changed over to the 25D tax credit is really going to pause the adoption of residential ownership of solar. We literally stopped selling new projects on August 8th to be able to commit that we could have them through the pipeline and installed so our customers could get the tax credit on 12/31. Think about that. We were so overbooked in both New York and Hawaii, we couldn't sell another job from August 8th and competently say that we would be able to get you your tax credit. So it's not like if you're driving a ship, which by the way, I'm a licensed captain. If you're driving a ship, it's, okay, I'm going to steer a little bit here. In this industry, it's always, I'm making a hard to port. Now I'm making a hard to starboard. There's just no stable ground. Today, we've had to retrain our sales team from traditional purchase mindset to third-party ownership. Now there's discussions about how do you finance, because the commercial tax credit is still growing. So those guys that knock at your door, those guys will sell you a system. You'll get a reduced kilowatt hour. Say, I'm just throwing numbers out there. Say, your utility is charging you 17 cents. They'll charge you 14 cents with a 2.99% escalator. So you don't really own it, but you also don't have to maintain it. But there is a delta where if the cost of energy doesn't go up at the same rate as that escalator, all of a sudden you're paying more for that solar power than if you did nothing at all, which is where we sit in New York on a lot of systems with some of these third parties who, ironically, have come and gone out of business. and left homeowners stranded, which is opportunity for us to do the servicing, right? So it's just there's never this stable ground. Right now, the commercial industry, because it still has access to tax credits and whatnot, is still, our pipeline is massive in New York on the commercial. Residential is starting to course correct, right? You'll hear things like when you interview some people that are in the finance side, synthetic cash. I know, like, what does that mean? But, they can still monetize these tax credits in a bulk with third-party ownership. You have to be so nimble, ready to pivot in this industry, or you're dead. Like, you just die so quickly. So,
yeah, no, it's Andy Grove from Intel with Only the Paranoid Survive. So as we wrap up here, Scott, I know it's a solar coaster, but what do you see the next 5 years looking like? I know there's a company called Base Power down here in Austin that thinks every house should have a battery pack and stuff like that. Do you see every single house having its own little mini grid internally, or how do you see the future?
So I think it's a super exciting time. I think we're almost at the bottom. The solar coaster has come here and is now climbing up. I think that what you're going to see, the midterm elections are going to come, things are going to change. The next president that comes in is going to change, and we'll see what happens. Right now, solar is a 4-letter word on Wall Street, right? It's a very volatile market. From adoption, I think that what you're going to see is, what I will say is that if you follow a company called SPAN, okay, I'm giving a plug out to my buddy Arch Rayo from SPAN. There was a release done where the traditional data center is just, it's almost hitting NIMBYism. Nobody wants them, right? For the water that they take and the power. Without having access to small nuclear, it's going to be tough. So everybody wants to go on ChatGPT and fix this stuff, but nobody wants the data center. It's just this convoluted mentality. But NVIDIA and Pulte Homes, I'll give them, some props also, have entered into agreement. And what they're trying to do now is put mini data centers and aggregate them in homeowner communities. So you'll see they'll build 8,000 homes and put this mini aggregation on the home and build a large data center, but it's distributed, right? Cool idea.
I've always wondered why I got 8 neighbors in my little neighborhood who all have Teslas. And I've always wondered why when they park in the garage overnight that they're not just all data centers.
So Elon, never count Elon out, right? So you look at Starlink and stuff like that. So there's going to be a lot of what has to happen. The cost of power has to continue to go up to make all these things viable, right? EV, unfortunately, I don't think that there's been as much EV adoption as certainly as Gavin Newsom would like in California, right? Like, I know in New York, I had a Tesla. I love driving it and stuff like that. The infrastructure didn't follow what was necessary. And listen, it doesn't, it's not every chair needs a butt. Not every butt fits in the right seat. But his idea that, no more fossil fuel, no more gas, it just doesn't work, right? But what you will see is people wanting to microgrid their houses more and to control, instead of being to have to rely on when they turn on that switch, they can only get power from one place. They want to own their own power. I'm not saying that they want to. I don't think there'll ever be a real place where the utilities will pay you more for power that you generate. But to get to back to that zero, where you're actually using what you create, storing what you need, is kind of a super cool place. It's almost like organically farming your own vegetables, right? Instead of going to the store. What a great idea, right? So we're making that happen, but it's a transition to get to that place. And utility, that's where I say the hyper regional is where it'll happen. You know what the driver in Texas of solar, the number one driver of Texas is hailstorms, because people have roofs that they're already ripping through their roofs and stuff. In Hawaii, it's storms, right? And mold and storms. That's what's driving at high utility rates. So everybody has their own area, but it's a super cool time and place to be a public company, right? That has growth on the horizon, that has a clean cap stack, that I can't tell you how many companies want to come under my hood. It's just, is this the right time? I lift the hood and I'm looking, because again, I'm a solar contractor. I'm not the CEO of a public company by trade. I'm the guy that could see if that business is operation right, if their message is right, if their customers understand what they're getting. And, throwing the dart at where the growth opportunities at the right time is really what we need to do.
Well, Scott, love what you're doing. Love the enthusiasm. Very cool company and structure. If my listeners want to learn a little bit more about SUNation Energy, where should I send them?
Well, the website is www.sunation.com, SUNation.com. My email is smaskin@sunnation.com. I look forward to direct communication. You'll find that, even with my shareholders, I put videos out. I actually respond to my shareholders. I think that's really important. It's a manifestation of the same customer experience that when I built SUNation, people deserve that somebody answers that phone, not just a bot, right? It's just a great time, and I'm really fortunate to be able to have built an industry locally and now take it to the next steps. And my shareholders have taken the ride with me because I communicate with them.
Yeah, 100%. Check out the SUNation YouTube channel. Scott does a really good job every quarter kind of doing a recap of what happened the previous quarter. It got me caught up to speed pretty quickly. So again,
I will say one thing. You may not like what you hear, but it's the truth, right? I don't sugarcoat it,
No, I like that. That's like a pro wrestling promo there at the end. I like that. So for those of you still listening, please remember to subscribe and review. Thanks.
Thanks, bud.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not provide financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or any offer to buy or sell any securities or to make any investment. The views expressed by the guests are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement therefor by NanoCap Podcast or its affiliates. The NanoCap Podcast Express disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented in this podcast.